You know, some killers don't just commit crimes, they engineer them. And there's one man who took that to a level so twisted, so unbelievably calculated that even historians argue about how deep his madness actually went. Curious? Let me take you back to Chicago in the late 1800s. Picture this: a city booming with opportunity, new faces arriving every day, and a man who blended right into the excitement. His name was Herman Webster Mudgett, but you and I know him as H. Holmes. Imagine meeting someone who looks charming, well dressed, educated, someone who smiles easily, speaks softly, and makes you feel like you can trust him instantly. Holmes was that guy. But behind the smile, a mind working overtime, plotting, scheming, and building something the world had never seen before. A building with hidden rooms, false doors, trap hallways, chutes, and chambers no visitor would ever escape from. People call it the Murder Castle even to this day. But to Holmes, it was just business. And the scariest part, nobody really knows how many people went into that building and never came out. And today, we're getting into that story. Before he became known as America's first serial killer, Holmes was just a skinny little boy. But here's the thing about Holmes. His childhood wasn't the dramatic horror movie kind people would normally expect. His parents were strict, religious, and very old school, the type that believed that discipline builds character. His father was, let's just say his father was especially firm, and there are whispers that Holmes grew up in a house where punishment wasn't just verbal. But even as a kid, he wasn't normal. You know those children who are quiet, overly smart, always observant? Holmes was that child. He was intelligent almost to the point of it being so unsettling. But Holmes was bullied as a child. There's this one story he used to tell later in life. Holmes would later go on to say that older boys once dragged him into a doctor's office and forced him to look at a human skeleton to scare him. And instead of running or screaming, he became so fascinated with it. And Holmes claims that this was the moment he realized that he wasn't like other kids. Whether the story is true or just Holmes bragging, we'll never know, but one thing was clear early on. He had this strange blend of intelligence, charm, zero empathy, and a big appetite for manipulation. Even as a teenager, Holmes lied effortlessly, not the small lies and fibs that children usually tell. No, he told big dramatic lies, and he had this way of switching personalities depending on who he was talking to. One minute, Holmes would be polite and gentle, and the next minute, cold and extremely calculating. But here's the part that really shaped Holmes. He realized early that being smart gave him a lot of power, and he started using that power to get what he wanted: money, reputation, attention, whatever. By the time he finished high school, Holmes already had that quiet, secretive confidence that makes you look at someone twice. And soon, he would discover a new obsession: medicine, anatomy, the human body, in fact, and how to profit from it. So after that strange childhood, the strict parents, the odd fascinations, the quiet intelligence, Holmes grew into a young man who believed he was destined for something bigger, and to him, that bigger started with medicine. So Holmes enrolled at the University of Michigan's medical school in the early 1880s. Because medical school back then wasn't clean or modern, it was raw, hands-on, bodies everywhere. Holmes didn't just get comfortable with it, he thrived. He always made people around him very uneasy because he moved like someone who had been around death his entire life. But here's the secret most students didn't know. Holmes wasn't just studying bodies, he was acquiring them. Back then, medical schools struggled to get cadavers, and instead of politely ordering them from a lab, the school had a shadowy off-the-book system for getting fresh bodies when they needed them for classes. So Holmes got close, and I mean very close, to the chief anatomy instructor, and this was the man that was in charge of supplying cadavers for dissections. And he was a man who didn't mind bending the rules, and Holmes really admired that. So very quickly, Holmes became his own official assistant, and together late at night, under the cover of darkness, they did the unthinkable. They visited cemeteries just after fresh burials and dug up the newly buried bodies. They smuggled them back to the medical school and sold them to other labs for profit. This was Holmes' real first training ground. While other students memorized anatomy charts, Holmes was in graveyards learning logistics, how to move bodies, how to hide them, and how to erase identities. And in typical Holmes fashion, he found a way to turn this into money. Holmes started committing insurance fraud. What he would do was that he would take out life insurance policies under fake names and then present a dead body to claim these insurance policies, and he would make the body so unrecognizable but a little bit believable in order to make it successful. And at this point, Holmes realized something. That was a business, and he could get away with some stuff if only he knew how to smile and act smart. He also developed a reputation on campus. Holmes was charming on the surface but deeply unsettling underneath. He kept borrowing money which he never returned, switching identities, lying effortlessly, and always finding a way to talk himself out of trouble. But academically, Holmes did well enough. Brilliant when he wanted to be, but manipulative when he needed to be. So by the time he graduated medical school, he walked out with more than just a degree. He walked out with real experience handling dead bodies, a relationship with authorities that protected him, a taste for scamming the system, and a quiet confidence that he could outsmart anyone. And with those skills sharpened, Holmes stepped into the world as a young doctor, ready to charm, ready to deceive, and ready to destroy. Chicago in the late 1880s was booming. There were new buildings every month, crowds everywhere, and people arriving with dreams in their pockets. It was the perfect place for a man who needed to disappear into a crowd while reinventing himself. And Holmes, he didn't enter Chicago quietly. He arrived with a plan to blend in, to charm everyone, and find a place where people could trust him instantly. And so, Holmes moved to Chicago in August 1886, which was when he began to use the pseudonym H. Holmes. Soon after his arrival, Holmes spotted a small pharmacy in the Inglewood neighborhood that was run by an older couple. He introduced himself with a smile, the kind of smile that made people lower their guard, and he claimed he was just a young doctor who was looking for work. He was polite, he was soft-spoken, very clean, very neat, always well dressed. And so instantly, the owner's wife loved him. And then the community started trusting him. And within weeks, Holmes was practically running the store. And then the rumors began. The pharmacy owner, the husband, suddenly got sick, very sick, and suddenly he was dead. Holmes comforted the widow and helped her run the business. He supported her emotionally, and soon after, she also disappeared. According to Holmes, she had moved out west and started a new life and was perfectly fine. But she was never seen again. And Holmes told everybody that she had left the pharmacy in his care. It was the first major disappearance that was tied directly to Holmes. Despite the fact that Holmes had this pharmacy completely under his control at this point, Holmes wasn't the type to stay idle for long. Just stay behind the counter and selling cough syrup wasn't enough for Holmes. He wanted more money, he had bigger ambitions. And now, if we go back to medical school, Holmes already knew that bodies could bring in money. People were basically business opportunities to Holmes. And so Holmes wanted to create a factory for human bodies, basically. And he knew exactly what he wanted to build. He wanted a place where he could charm women into renting rooms, where no one would question if they went missing. A home where he could control the hallways, the doors, the rooms, where he could experiment without interruption and produce these cadavers to sell. And he would run scams out of the same buildings and literally just trap his victims inside the walls with no escape. Holmes didn't just want a simple building. He wanted a machine, a factory that was built on invisibility and opportunity. And Chicago gave him the perfect setup. The city was preparing for the World's Fair. Millions of visitors expected, and young women were moving there for work, often alone, often far from their family, no phones, no records, no digital trail. So to Holmes, it was like someone handed him a menu and said, take your choice, pick whatever you want. And Holmes knew exactly what he wanted. And so that's how the idea of the murder castle was born, not from insanity, but from cold financial ambition that was tied to his past experience of selling bodies for profits. So Holmes purchased an empty lot that was just across the street, and construction began in 1887. Holmes wanted a mixed-use building, and mixed use in the sense that there would be apartments on the second floor, retail spaces on the second floor as well, and a new drugstore on the first. And so he approached architects and he approached carpenters and builders, and Holmes did it with his charm, with a charming smile and a gentleman's voice. He hired one team to start building, then fired them halfway, claiming they were incompetent. And then he hired another team and did the same thing. He kept rotating workers, so no single person ever understood the full layout. One carpenter might install a door and another would build a wall behind it, and then someone else would add a stairway that led nowhere. It was chaos for the workers, but for Holmes, it was perfect. He designed rooms that looked only from the outside, hallways that looked back unnaturally, and secret passages within the walls of the building. And then Holmes added a long chute that dropped straight into the basement. And in this basement, he outfitted the basement with acid vats, with quicklime, a dissecting table, and a furnace that was hot enough to destroy bones. Now remember, Holmes wasn't just killing for profit or for pleasure. He needed these bodies for his insurance scam. He needed the bodies for experimentation. He needed the bodies for a whole lot of reasons, okay? And so this castle had to serve all of those reasons. And so he created a system, a machine where people walked in and Holmes walked out with money, with freedom, and with a sense of satisfaction. But in spite of all this, Holmes didn't see it as insanity. He saw it as business. He saw it as a continuation of the life he had been building since the day he dug his first grave. And with the World's Fair approaching, Holmes knew his business was about to boom. Despite the fact that the architects and the builders had done their jobs, Holmes declined to pay the architects or the steel company, Atna Iron and Steel, and this was the company that took the contract. And so they took him to court in 1888. And in 1892, he ordered a third floor, telling investors and suppliers that he intended to use it as a hotel during the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition. But Holmes would win in court and the building would be finished. And now Holmes had this castle, okay? This tall, confusing, full of secrets, crazy castle. From the outside, it looked normal, okay? It was like a big, busy boarding house in Inglewood, but on the inside, it was something that was entirely different. This was Holmes' playground, his hunting ground, and he was ready for action. Now, Holmes knew exactly how to pick his victims. He knew that he needed women who were young, unmarried, who had recently moved to Chicago and looking for work. So he would charm them with that soft voice, that gentle manner, and the well-dressed, perfect gentleman look, and hire them as secretaries, as bookkeepers, as assistants. And he would more often than not offer them lodging for their, in quotes, safety. Okay, sometimes he knew he needed to flirt, sometimes he knew he needed to be a father figure, whatever worked to lure these women in, Holmes was doing it. And a lot of women felt safe with him. So it was so easy for Holmes to get unknowing victims. Holmes kept the building busy. It was such a busy building. There were always workers, always tenants, always visitors, people buying medicine downstairs from the drugstores. It was basically a busy building. But nobody ever knew the whole picture. Every floor was like a puzzle. People kept getting lost, and it was a puzzle that basically Holmes knew the solution to. Only Holmes knew the solution to the entire puzzle. In that building, Holmes had hidden peepholes where he would spy on women. He had sliding panels that slid into walls and secret passages that he used to watch these women without them even knowing. And the man was always watching. He was always planning, and he was always waiting. Some rooms in the hotel were perfectly normal, while others were complete nightmares. Holmes even designed several bedrooms to basically be gas chambers. Now, I want you to imagine the fear as a young woman renting a room. You lock your door, you go to bed at night. And here we have Holmes standing downstairs, slowly turning a valve while smiling softly to himself. That's how calculated this man was. There was another room in the hotel that was completely soundproof, padded interiors, no windows, and Holmes allegedly used this to trap his victims for hours, sometimes even days. Nobody would hear a thing, and nobody would even question anything because nobody even knew there was somebody that was in there. This was his private chamber of power. Now, when Holmes was done torturing or doing whatever he wanted to do to the woman, he would open the door, lift the body, and then slide it down a long chute straight down to the basement. No mess, no witnesses, no struggle. And down in the basement, he had everything he needed. If he wanted to dissect the body, he had a dissecting table. If he wanted to cremate the body, he had the cremating furnace, he had acid vats to dissolve bodies. You know, he had everything, and Holmes didn't believe in wasting resources. So even after doing whatever he wanted to do with the bodies, he would clean up the bodies and sell the clean skeletons to medical labs, making money off the dead. Holmes was living his dream life. Now, Holmes didn't just kill strange women, he also killed women who were close to him. One of those women was a woman called Julia. Now, Julia was the wife of a man who worked in Holmes' pharmacy. She was a pretty lively woman, but she was very unhappy in her marriage, and Holmes quickly noticed this. And so he started flirting with Julia, and after a while, she fell for him. And so Julia left her husband and moved into Holmes' building with her little daughter Pearl. Holmes promised Julia that he was going to marry her, but he told her that before they would get married, he needed to perform a medical procedure on her, and that was the last time anyone ever saw Julia or Pearl. And when questioned, Holmes gave his usual explanation. Oh, they moved away suddenly, but no one ever heard from them ever again. And then there was another woman called Emmeline Singren. Emmeline worked at a dental office before meeting Holmes, and after meeting Holmes, Holmes lured her in with promises of a better pay and professional opportunities. And before long, he was also proposing to her, telling her they would build a future together and telling her she was very special. And then one day, she just vanished. A witness later claimed to have seen Holmes carrying a heavy trunk that same week, and Holmes was really struggling with the weight of the trunk and transporting the trunk to the basement. And inside Holmes' building, heavy trunks meant only one thing: there was a cadaver inside the trunk. There was also another woman named Minnie Williams. Minnie was sweet, she was very shy, and she had just inherited property in Texas. And immediately Holmes targeted her. He convinced her to sign over her real estate to him, promising marriage, promising love, and Minnie believed every word. Holmes then brought her sister to Chicago, telling Minnie it was time for them to all live together as family. And just like the first two women, both sisters vanished shortly after, gone without a trace, and Holmes owning their land. Holmes did this for years. And after a while, in typical Holmes fashion, he needed something new. He needed something bigger. He needed something that involved real money. I'm talking big money. And that was when he met Benjamin F. Peterson. Now, Peterson wasn't a victim at first. Peterson was Holmes' criminal partner. He was a handyman, a carpenter, and a bit of a dreamer. And he always believed he was one scam away from a better life. And Holmes saw that weakness immediately. Okay? Peterson admired Holmes. He admired not just his charm, but also his brain. He admired the way he could plan a scam and make it look really clean and get away with it. And Holmes took Peterson in like a mentor. And so before long, Peterson was fixing things around the castle. He was running errands. He was helping Holmes with paperwork and also participating in a little bit of fraud here and there with Holmes. Okay. And he became one of the very few people that were allowed behind the curtain. Holmes even referred to him as his associates, which in Holmes' world was privilege, was something that was very, very rare. But here's the sad part. Peterson trusted Holmes much more than Holmes ever trusted him. Holmes eventually pitched Peterson the biggest scam of his life. They would take out a $10,000 life insurance policy, which was a fortune at the time, and then they would fake Petersil's death. Okay, and then Holmes would then present a cadaver, and just like he had done many times before in medical school, they would split the money after he claimed the insurance, and they were supposed to split it 50-50. The scam sounded simple, it sounded familiar, and it was just perfect, and Petersil agreed. But here's the catch. Holmes had no intention of splitting that money. When the time came, instead of sourcing a cadaver or stealing a body, Holmes did what Holmes always did when money was involved. He eliminated the problem. Holmes killed Petersil himself using chloroform and then staged it to look like it was a lab explosion, and the insurance company bought it. And so he claimed the insurance money, but this wasn't enough for Holmes. Okay, he needed to go a step further. So he went over to Petersil's wife, Carrie, and he told her that her husband was still alive and that Petersil was just hiding out because the scam had worked so well. And Carrie believed him. So Holmes convinced her to let him take some of the Petersil children, claiming that he wanted to reunite them with their father. And Carrie, unsuspecting and trusting and, a widow, just believing that her husband was doing what was best for the family, had no choice but to give the children to Holmes. At first, everything looked fine. Holmes submitted an insurance claim. He explained the explosion. He played the grieving friend. But then the insurance company noticed something odd. Holmes wanted the payout very fast. And I'm talking too fast. Okay? And then a quiet voice in the room said, investigate this death. And so they sent detectives to look into the case, and immediately things didn't add up. Holmes had used a fake name, the body didn't match certain details, and the widow didn't seem to know where her husband really was, and something smelled really, really wrong. Now, remember that Holmes had told Mrs. Petersil that her husband was alive and hiding, right? And he had told her, don't worry, I'll take the children to him, they'll be safe. But when weeks went by and there were no letters, no calls, no messages, just silence, Mrs. Petersil began to worry, and then she finally told the detectives, look, my husband is alive. Holmes is taking the children to meet him. And that was when one of the detectives, Detective Geyer, looked at her and said gently, ma'am, I don't think your husband is alive. And that was when the hunt for Holmes really started. Holmes was on the run, but the detective that was assigned to the case, Detective Frank Geyer of the Philadelphia Police Department, meant business. This man was relentless. Okay, so even though Holmes dragged the children halfway across America, changing names, changing hotels, trains, and stories, Geyer wasn't fooled. He visited every hotel that Holmes stayed in, and every clerk remembered Holmes, the charming man with the gentle voice, and the children who always looked so confused and sad. And city by city, they followed the trail. From Cincinnati to Indianapolis to Detroit to Toronto to Chicago to Philadelphia, everyone remembered Holmes and everyone remembered the kids. But none of them ever saw the kids or the children leaving, which was such a red flag. So after weeks of chasing clues, Geyer finally reached Toronto, and Geyer tracked Holmes to Toronto. Neighbors remembered a man who rented a house, and the man had 2 little girls with him, Alice and Nellie. And so Geyer checked behind the house, and there he found a shallow grave, and inside the grave were the bodies of the 2 Petersil daughters. They were killed and buried like they were nothing. Now, after Gaia found the bodies of the two little girls, he wanted to keep going. Now, this discovery shook the entire investigation. Holmes wasn't just a fraudster anymore, he wasn't just a murderer anymore, he was a child murderer. And there was still one child with him, the little boy Howard. So by the time they got to Indianapolis, unfortunately, Gaia found a stove where Holmes had tried to destroy the remains of Howard, and it was obvious that Holmes had killed all three children. And after this discovery, all of the rumors and disappearances and guests not leaving, secretaries disappearing, fiancés, disappearing, all of those rumors didn't seem far-fetched anymore. It was believable that Holmes had been killing all of these people. Detectives later tracked Holmes down to Boston, and that was where Holmes was arrested. Holmes thought he could charm his way out like he always did, but this time the entire country was paying attention and reporters were hungry. And so when Holmes was arrested, detectives and reporters finally turned their attention to his mysterious building in Inglewood, the one that neighbors always found a bit strange and had a lot of rumors surrounding it. But nobody had any idea what they were about to uncover. Okay, and once the investigators stepped in, the castle became a nightmare maze. At first glance, it looked normal. It was a pharmacy downstairs, room for rent, staircases, hallways, the usual, okay? But as detectives walked in and the deeper they went into the building, nothing made sense. It was like Holmes designed the building for madness, basically. Everywhere they turned in the house, they found women's shoes, women's jewelry, torn clothing, pieces of rib cages, bones, femurs, spines, a child's toy. In fact, it was like Holmes was killing and he didn't care if anyone found the remains of these people. Okay, it's like almost like he never really expected to be caught, so he was really careless with disposing the bodies and disposing the properties of his victim. And now the entire country was reading this story in complete shock. No one had ever seen anything like it. When this story broke, reporters flooded into Chicago. People were shocked. One officer said it was like walking into a slaughterhouse that was designed by a doctor. Now, even though the castle was filled with a lot of evidence, prosecutors focused on the crimes that they could prove beyond doubt. One was the murder of Benjamin Petersall, and two was the murders of Petersall's three children. Those were solid cases with dates, with locations, with testimonies and physical evidence. But if they were to charge Holmes for the murders in the castle, there was no paperwork, no photos, no trace. Holmes had already made sure of that. And so prosecutors decided to push forward with the crimes that they could actually prosecute him for. And Holmes decided to be his own lawyer. At the entire trial, Holmes sat there smiling, cracking jokes, and even flirting with some of the female spectators in the gallery. He was enjoying himself. He questioned witnesses like he was having a business meeting, and he enjoyed the fact that reporters were calling him handsome, unnervingly calm, a devil with a face of a gentleman. He played into it. He gave interviews. He acted like a celebrity, not a criminal. But just before the verdict, Holmes wrote a strange autobiography claiming that he had killed only 27 people. And then later, he claimed he had killed only one. And then later, he said, maybe 100 or even more. Most historians believe that Holmes was lying on purpose, like he loved the chaos and the mystery and he just wanted to go down in history as something bigger than reality. In fact, he once said, I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. After days of testimony and a mountain of evidence, the jury didn't take long. Holmes was found guilty of first degree murder and sentenced to death by hanging. On August 19th, 1895, while Holmes was still awaiting execution, neighbors saw smoke rising from the castle. Two men were seen entering the building late at night, and minutes later, flames were everywhere. By the time the firefighters arrived, the roof had collapsed and the upper floors were burnt so badly, and the entire inside of the castle was destroyed. People said it felt like the building itself was trying to erase what had happened. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes was led to the gallows where he addressed the crowd politely. He said, I have only killed one person. Even though everyone knew that that was a lie, Holmes had killed even more people. After his execution, newspapers labeled him as the Beast of Chicago, America's first serial killer, and even the devil in human form. Historians still argue about the death count. Even though Holmes admitted to killing 27 people and then just one person and then just 100 people, the truth is we would never know. The castle destroyed most of the evidence and Holmes destroyed identities, so we would never really know how many people that Holmes truly killed. And that is the story of H. Holmes, a man who walked through life with a soft smile, polished shoes, and the kind of charm that disarms you before you even realize it. A man who built a house, not for living, but basically for disappearing people, and someone who turned trust into opportunity, opportunity into profit, and profit into death. Holmes wasn't the kind of monster that hid under the bed. He was the monster who shook your hand, looked you in the eyes, made you feel comfortable right before he destroyed you. And over a century later, historians are still arguing about how many people really walked into the building and never came back out. But the truth is, we'll never know, and that's the part that chills the bones the most. Holmes left behind no remorse, no apologies, just questions and shadows. But his story reminds us of something uncomfortable. Evil doesn't show up with red eyes and sharp teeth all the time. Sometimes it wears a suit, sometimes it smiles politely. This has been The Monster Under the Bed, and thank you for walking through this darkness with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and always remember the scariest monsters are the ones who look just like us.